Haptic devices for sim racing. Bass shakers, vibration motors, butt kickers, whatever you want to call them. People have been telling me for years that I need to get these on my sim rig because they're one of the best and most cost-effective upgrades that you can get, apparently. But the whole thing for less than the cost of an iRacing subscription? Really? Let's find out. I'm DDF Racer, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at these ridiculously inexpensive bass shakers from AliExpress, how to install and set them up using SimHub, what they feel like, and probably what you want to know about the most, if they actually help improve your driving. Well, let me spoil the video for you nice and early. Yes, they absolutely do. Not only am I able to make my tyres last longer over the course of a stint, I've also been able to find a full 1 second per lap in the Praga R1 at Circuit Thermalito, a circuit that I know inside out and I'm very familiar with, having driven thousands of laps there because, well, I designed the place. Being able to physically tell when you're about to lock up or have triggered the ABS through your braking foot, or feel the accelerator vibrating depending on how much the wheels are slipping, is absolutely invaluable. I'm no longer guessing if I'm pushing the car too hard based on the force feedback I'm getting through the wheel or through the audio-visual cues that the game is giving me. When you get these bass shakers configured correctly, they'll tell you exactly when you're being an idiot and running out of grip. That said, it's definitely not a quick process getting these things dialed in. It's going to take a bit of effort and a lot of trial and error. I've probably spent the best part of 3 weeks, no exaggeration, playing around in SimHub before I felt confident enough to commit this all to video. But it's also not an exaggeration to say that they've made a massive impact on my driving style. For the better. Disclaimer, this isn't a sponsored or an affiliate video, although I do have the links down in the video description for you to be able to get what you need for this setup. I don't actually earn anything if you click on those links. These opinions are purely my own and completely honest and unbiased. That said, I didn't actually pay for any of this. It's a freebie from longtime friend and fellow sim racer, RangeyRover, who swears by these bass shakers and has been trying to get me into them for years. So, yeah. Thanks, Rangey. What you need: 2 shakers, some way of mounting them, in this case 90-degree brackets and bolts for my Fanatec V3 pedals, an amplifier/USB sound card, the cables to connect everything up, SimHub, and a bit of patience. Actually, a lot of patience. As you can see, that only comes to just over 100 Australian dollars, which, when you think about it, isn't really that much in the grand scheme of things. Especially when you consider that a lovely pair of these Suitspeed sim racing gloves cost only 99 Australian dollars. Make that 89.10 if you use the code DDFRacer at checkout for 10% off. Now, the physical placement of these shakers is completely up to you. I've got them on my pedals, but if you want to put one on your pedal base plate and another under your seat, then go for it. Nobody says you have to do it like I have. Everybody's setup and rig is completely different, so you're going to need to figure out your own mounting solution if you want to get these things on your rig. But if you're this far into a video on custom bass shakers for sim racing, then I'd probably say you're not too averse to a little bit of fancy engineering. Installation and setup. In my case, installation wasn't too difficult, but I did have an issue with stuck bolts on my pedal faces. Now, apparently this isn't a Fanatec specific thing, more of a stainless steel specific thing, but yeah, they were pretty seized up, and in my failed attempts to remove them, I made some nice big scratches due to the Allen key slipping and eventually rounding the bolt. So I gave up before I caused any further damage. As only the top ones could be removed, I had to compromise with the bracket mount and only attach it on 1 bolt, not 2 as originally planned, so it does stick up a bit more than I was expecting, and to be fair, probably does reduce the effectiveness of those vibrations being transferred. I was able to reattach the original Fanatec motors on my V3s, so can still get some secondary vibrations from those, but as we'll find out shortly, those kind of pale into insignificance by comparison. Connecting the shakers to the sound card wasn't too tricky, although the exposed copper wiring can be a bit intimidating if you're not used to working with these old-style hi-fi connections. But as long as you trace the wires back to positive and negative and make sure they all match up, then you're good. No drivers needed for the sound card either, just simple plug and play through the USB. Although make sure Windows doesn't change your system default sound device to this new sound card, otherwise you could end up with something like this. Now that's the hardware side of things done, but in order to get some signals to these shakers, you're going to need something called SimHub. It's completely free to download, and if you don't already have it, it's an awesome program. That said, I would strongly recommend buying a license, as this will increase your data refresh rate to the shakers from 10 to 60 times a second. Compatible with the vast majority of racing sims, SimHub receives telemetry from in-game, and your imagination and creativity is the limit, really. You can create custom data overlays or trigger external devices such as dashboards, fans, or in this instance, bay shakers. Obviously, once everything's connected up, go to the Shake It Bay Shakers tab along the side in SimHub, and then the Sound Output tab along the top. Make sure your device is enabled, use the arrow to expand the sound device, and to check that everything's connected and working, click on the Test Now buttons. And if everything's right, you should hear them kick in, like this. For me, channel 1 is the accelerator and channel 2 is the brake, but yours might be slightly different depending on how you've wired things up. Now, adjust the sound card volume to your preference. If you've got no neighbours or housemates, family, whatever downstairs, then as loud as you can go without distortion, otherwise as loud as you're comfortable with. Fair warning though, these things aren't silent. Yes, they're designed to shake and vibrate, but the way they do that is by playing back audio frequencies, specifically bass frequencies, and it is noticeable. They might be attached to your pedals, seat, wherever, but that is also going through into the floor and anything else it can travel through, unless you've got a rig which is acoustically decoupled from whatever it's sitting on, of course, but that's another project in itself. Now, as wonderful and versatile as SimHub is, it's an absolute rabbit hole, and once you get started tweaking and playing around with things, you could spend months on it. To make things even more complicated and time-consuming, different sims transmit different data using different values, and some sims don't actually transmit certain data at all. Looking at you, iRacing, and your complete lack of tyre telemetry. So what might work well in Automobilist 2 might be horrible in Raceroom and might not work at all somewhere else. Even then, your mileage will vary from car to car in each different sim, so this is something you're probably going to spend a lot of time playing around with. Rather foolishly, I thought I could get this all knocked over in a day or two, but realistically, all up, I've probably spent the best part of 3 weeks getting things dialed in and adjusted, and even now I'm still making small changes here and there. I'm not going to lie though, when I first started using these, I wasn't a fan at all. The feedback that I was getting through SimHub and the games just unconfigured was awful. I wasn't getting any useful information, I wasn't getting any good values back from the car. It sounded horrible, it was too noisy, it wasn't good, but like I said, through a lot of trial and error, I've been able to get to a point now that I'm kind of comfortable with it. Unfortunately, I couldn't create a master profile, so to speak. Raceroom's tyre slip values seem to be a lot stronger than AMS2 by comparison, for example, so I ended up creating individual profiles for each sim that I use and fine-tuning each one separately. This includes iRacing, Assetto Corsa, Raceroom, AMS2, Richard Burns Rally, and EA WRC. Anything else I either currently don't own or don't use enough to justify going through the rather time-consuming process of getting everything set up. But because I believe that you shouldn't have to go through this process all over again just like I did, links to download all of my SimHub profiles are down in the video description. Big disclaimer, these profiles are based on my settings, my personal preferences, and my shaker setup. No doubt that your setup and your preferences are going to be different, but for those who want to use what I've done as a starting point, go for it. But whatever you do, please read the instructions in the included PDF file. And if you're finding any of this video useful, then maybe consider leaving it a like and subscribing, because that genuinely does help out. If you plan on making your own profiles or modifying mine, then do yourself a favor and make your life a little bit easier. Use the SimHub replay feature. Instead of heading out on track every time you want to test something out, this feature allows you to play back telemetry later and change your settings in real time. To do that, press the record button here, then press start recording and go and do your run. It doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, the more understeer, brake lockups, wheel spin moments and so on you have, the better, since you're going to be using these laps later on to dial in your feedback. When you're all done, press live, and now you have that run saved and can relive those laps anytime you like, changing your settings on the fly to see how they feel as you go. Only replays for the active sim are available though, so if you recorded a run in iRacing but your active game on the dashboard is set to AMS2, it's not going to go and show it up, so make sure you select the right game to get your replays up. What does it feel like? Well, honestly, it kind of feels like cheating. I can tell exactly when I'm being a bit too aggressive with my inputs, when I'm going beyond the limit of grip in the car, when I'm about to lock a brake, when I'm spinning the wheels too much, and then that allows me to dial it back in real time, or, at the very worst, just do it better on the next lap. Normally, I'd have to go back and look at replay files or telemetry readouts to do this, to get an idea of, where I was being an idiot, but now that these shakers are dialed in, I'm actually getting that information fed back to me in real time. In the most basic terms of what this feels like physically, the closer I get towards the limit of what the car is physically capable of, the more the vibrations ramp up, not just in terms of strength, but also they get deeper as well, so it kind of transitions from a scrubbing sensation at first to more of a low rumble when you get towards 100%. Consider it more of an early warning system instead of an alarm that just goes off when you've done something wrong. It's kind of hard to convey exactly how this feels because, well, I mean, this is just a YouTube video, but as Chad Kroger once famously put it,
look at this graph.
Now, to explain that a little bit more, the amount of wheel slip on each corner of the car, also taking into account the load on that specific corner of the car as well, determines how much vibration is generated. If the front left starts to lose grip through a high-speed right-hander, then I'm definitely going to feel that. Whereas if the same front left tyre loses grip as it comes off the ground at the hairpin at Monaco, then I'm not going to feel that at all because, it's not actually touching the road and isn't loaded up at all. It also factors in the amount of throttle as a small multiplier too, so if I'm losing grip and I apply more throttle, then the vibrations will ramp up as a warning to be like, hey, you're pushing the limits a bit here. All of these calculations take into account the maximum load that a car can generate too, because you'll get significantly more force from an F1 car than you would from an NSU through the same corner. It took me a little while to figure these calculations out, but now I can effectively jump into any car and have a consistent experience. It'll take a few corners, maybe a full lap, to establish those maximum load values at first, but once they're set, provided I don't change car between sessions, then I'm good. It's also got a built-in safety cutoff for crashes and suddenly unexpected load spikes too. So if you slam into the barriers, as I've been known to do occasionally, it doesn't blow the maximum values out of proportion and stop the shakers from vibrating anymore. This is all for wheel slip calculations, but the same is also happening for the brakes too. The closer I get to locking up, the more intense the vibrations get, with an actual lockup being 100% signal and that low, full rumble coming through, regardless of how much brake is being applied. Also, if the ABS is triggered, it'll play back a pulsing effect with the strength based on how much you're pushing the brakes. No point having it going full beans if you're only dragging the brakes a tiny bit into the corner whilst trail braking. Looking at you, Race Room. This all works surprisingly well for rallying too. You'd think that sliding sideways through every corner would cause the shakers to go into meltdown because the car is constantly struggling for grip, but these calculations are based on the grip loss as a percentage of what the car is capable of. It's only when you push too hard and the car can't stick to the road, regardless of whether that road is tarmac, gravel or snow, that the vibrations kick in. It's actually incredibly useful, particularly on corner exits on loose surfaces, to help progressively feed that throttle in for the most efficient acceleration. Now for rallying, I actually switched out the ABS effect for the handbrake. So effectively, when you lock the rears to get it around that hairpin, you get a pulsed vibration effect based on how much handbrake you're using and the G-forces acting upon the car, which is just, it's incredibly satisfying, I'm not going to lie. And last but not least, there is a very subtle effect that jolts both shakers when you change gear. It's not particularly noticeable for H-pattern when you're clutching and lifting off the accelerator to shift, but it's a nice little sensation for any car where your foot remains on the pedal going up through the gears. The positives. The biggest positive that I can take away from these base shakers is the difference that they've been able to make to my lap times. Not just faster, but also more consistent and with significantly fewer errors as well, because I can actually feel where the limit of grip is. I say this in the most genuine way possible, not to brag or be arrogant, but I've been sim racing with a wheel for the best part of 20 years, so I feel confident saying that I know what I'm doing. Yet, over the past few weeks, playing around with these shakers, I've been able to improve my driving style and find these gains. So just imagine what this could do for someone with less experience and even bigger gains to find. The low cost of these things is also very attractive. It's insanely cheap for what it actually is, and when you've got it configured correctly, it can convey so much more information than you'd normally rely on through the force feedback in the steering wheel or visual and audio cues from the game. Upgrading to load cell pedals is usually the big one that helps you find the most lap time, but you're not going to find a set of load cell pedals anywhere near as cheap as this. And you can set them up exactly the way that you want to. Since it's not a pre-made product, you're not limited to what the manufacturer gives you. These shakers can be mounted wherever you want, and the software side of things through SimHub is completely customizable too. If you don't like the way something feels, you can change it. It's also seriously cool. For the majority of us non-esports sweats at least, the reason we're doing this is for fun, and these shakers certainly put a big smile on your face. The first time you try a wheel with force feedback, the first time you put on a VR headset, that kind of thing. It's a wow feeling, something which allows you to connect with what's happening in the game in a completely new way. The negatives. If I had to pick the biggest negative about these bass shakers, then it would have to be the noise. If you're in the same building as someone when you're using these things, they're probably going to hear them. Whether they're your family, housemates, or neighbors, those bass frequencies are going through the floor. I've got my rig on top of a rug and carpet, but it doesn't really do that much. And turning down the level of the shakers to a point where it's not too noticeable also means having vibrations which aren't too noticeable either. At that point, I might as well just be using the default motors that come with my Fanatec V3 pedals. Also, the time investment needed to get SimHub configured correctly is significant. Sure, you can use my settings and profiles as a starting point, download link in the video description, but if you really want to make it suited to your specific setup and preferences, then it's going to take a while. The SimHub replay feature does make it a little bit easier, but each sim is different, each car is different, each rig is different, you get the idea. The durability is also a bit of an unknown, and if something goes wrong, you're kind of on your own. These are cheap components, probably not built to the highest of standards, and while they might be working now, will they be working in 6 months' time? A year? 5 years? There's no tech support available and no manufacturer to fall back on to diagnose a fault and send you a replacement component under warranty. Because this is all a do-it-yourself type project, if something goes wrong, you're the one who's got to fix it. Are bass shakers worth it? In my honest and unbiased opinion, if your living situation allows you to get some bass shakers and the noise isn't too much of an issue, then get some bass shakers, seriously. Especially considering how little it costs. As much as we rely on our input devices to control what happens, it's a two-way street. They also tell us what's happening too. Let's not forget that. Adding these shakers is like adding another sense. Being able to feel the vibrations ramp up as you get closer to the limit of grip allows you to find that limit more easily and stay within what the car is capable of, instead of going beyond it and then trying to recover. Of course, with sim racing, we'll never get to experience the G-forces that real drivers experience, but this is one step closer towards feeling what the car is doing. And super accessible too. For years, I've thought that upgrading to a load cell pedal was the single most cost-effective upgrade that you could make, but now I'm not so sure. Getting these DIY bass shakers set up on the rig has honestly blown me away with how much more information I can get with such little investment. Getting them set up isn't too difficult, although a little bit time consuming, but once you do find that sweet spot and get them dialed in, I honestly don't think you'll look back. Actually, you know what? If you want to save yourself a little bit more money, then you should probably check out this video where I try out a $50 handbrake from eBay.